Have you ever owned something and watched someone else destroy it for your safety? What if a neighborhood committee could drain your private lake, fine you thousands of dollars, and turn your peaceful home into a muddy nightmare? What would you do if your so-called homeowners association became more like a petty dictatorship? And what happens when the quiet guy they underestimated decides to turn their homes into swamps? This isn't just a story about water rights. It's about revenge, strategy, and how a backyard war turned poetic. Stay with me, because by the time the final rain falls, they'll wish they never touched my lake. Moved here for peace. The kind of quiet only a private lake and a cup of morning coffee can give you. Until the HOA showed up, clipboard in hand, power tripping behind fake smiles and bylaws no one remembered voting for. One morning, I stepped outside to the sound of industrial pumps and men in orange vests wading through my waterfront backyard. The lake, my lake, was being drained. No notice, no warning. Just a smug HOA president waving a document claiming flood risk mitigation. Funny. The only thing ever flooding was his ego. They said it was for safety. But let me tell you, what was really going on behind those freshly painted fences and fake smiles? This wasn't about water. It was about control. They stole my view, ruined the ecosystem, and turned my property value into swamp dirt. But here's what they didn't know. I grew up on land disputes. My father taught me how to read the land and how to fight back without ever raising my voice. So I waited. I watched. I planned. And when the time came, I made sure every last one of their manicured lawns turned into marshland. Oh, and I didn't break a single rule doing it. Stick around, because this isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of poetic justice, HOA hypocrisy, and what happens when you pick a fight with the wrong neighbor. Let's rewind. When I bought the property 3 years ago, it was a slice of heaven. Tucked on the edge of a sleepy suburban community, my land had the only private lake in the area, about half an acre wide, surrounded by old willows and frogs that sang every night. It wasn't technically under HOA jurisdiction, but the Greater Lakeview Neighborhood Association, a name that aged poorly once they killed the lake, had recently expanded their coverage, quietly, strategically. Most neighbors didn't even realize the vote to expand included shared environmental zones. Translation, my lake. They used a legal technicality, buried in a document no one read, and claimed jurisdiction for ecological maintenance. That's how they got in. It started with friendly visits. Hey there! Just doing a routine survey of the lakefront. We noticed a lot of algae buildup. Might be good to let us handle it. I declined politely. They smiled less politely. Then came the letters. Warnings about standing water posing a mosquito hazard. Concerns about unapproved wildlife structures. Photos of my dock circled in red ink like it was a crime scene. At first I thought it was a mistake, a bureaucratic mix-up. But when I spoke to my neighbor Greg, an ex-HOA board member who quit after calling them the Stepford cult, he shook his head and said, "They've wanted your land for years. The lake makes your property more valuable than theirs, and that drives them crazy." He wasn't wrong. At the next HOA meeting I showed up, they tried to ignore me. I raised my hand. They said I wasn't on the agenda. When I asked about the sudden flooding concern, their president, a woman named Cheryl, who wore pearls to mow her lawn, smirked and said, "Well, some of us care about community safety." A week later, without notice, they drained the lake. They claimed it was temporary, but the pumps ran for days. The fish were gone. The turtles vanished. Even the reeds dried out like bones in the sun. My once lush waterfront, now just cracked mud and tire tracks. I emailed, I called, I even filed a formal complaint. Their response, a $4,200 bill for hazard mitigation and emergency aquatic removal. They expected me to pay for the destruction of my own property. And that was when I realized this wasn't incompetence. It was a declaration of war. They'd taken my view, my peace, my land. But what they didn't take was my patience. And patience is a dangerous thing when you know exactly how to use it. Because Cheryl and her clipboard crew, they had no idea the water wasn't just part of the land. It was part of the plan. And that was just the beginning. The thing about Cheryl and the HOA board, they weren't just annoying. They were relentless. Once they drained the lake, they didn't just walk away. They doubled down. Week 1, I got slapped with a violation for excessive mud accumulation on land they had flooded and stripped bare. Week 2, they ticketed me for non-native species intrusion. Apparently, a family of raccoons moved in, drawn by the drying reeds and easy access. Week 3. They said my backyard was structurally unsound and threatened to condemn it if I didn't install proper drainage infrastructure. They wanted me to dig trenches across my own land. Meanwhile, Cheryl's backyard, 3 houses down, looked like a botanical magazine cover. Sprinklers misting, garden gnome smugly smiling, HOA funding mysteriously approved for landscaping upgrades. I wasn't just being punished. I was being made an example of. Greg, the neighbor who warned me, stopped by one evening with a folder. "I found this in the HOA archives," he said. "They've been planning this since the drought scare 2 years ago. They want to build a walking trail right where your lake used to be." He showed me a blueprint, my land drawn out in dotted lines, labeled Phase 2 Community Pathway. That was their plan. Take the lake, shame the owner, then slowly choke the property value until it was amicably donated. But I didn't scare easy. I started documenting everything: photos, videos, HOA letters. I even set up a motion-triggered camera by the dock post, and I caught them. A board member, Todd, the one who wore cargo shorts like a personality, was caught sneaking onto my property at night, digging shallow holes and dumping murky water. The next morning, I got cited for unauthorized standing water. "You can't make this up." When I presented the footage to the HOA, Cheryl said with a straight face, "Well, maybe if your property wasn't such a hazard, Todd wouldn't have been trying to help." Help? He was creating the very violations they were charging me for. Neighbors started whispering. Some backed away. Others apologized in hushed tones. But no one stood up, because no one wanted to be next. And then came the fines. They stacked up weekly. $300 here, $450 there. Late fees, compounding interest. By the end of the month, the HOA claimed I owed over $10,000. They sent a notice threatening a lien. But here's the thing. I had never signed the revised covenant that included their new jurisdiction. Legally, they were bluffing, but they knew most homeowners wouldn't question it. Most people would fold. I didn't. I called a land surveyor, hired an attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases, and I started learning everything I could about flood patterns, soil permeability, and most importantly, drainage law. Why? Because if they wanted to weaponize water, I was about to teach them what real wetland problems look like. In my research, I discovered something fascinating. Cheryl's house, built barely 3 feet above the regional water table. And guess what? With my lake gone, the underground saturation had nowhere to settle. But if someone were to say, reroute just a little bit of the seasonal runoff, not illegally, not forcibly, just naturally via legal terrain, well, let's just say her garden gnomes might need flotation devices. I built what I called the swale network. On paper, it was for erosion control and natural irrigation. Completely legal. It was a series of ditches, drain spouts, and French drains that ever so gently encouraged runoff to, well, settle where the water already wanted to go. Gravity is a beautiful thing, especially when your enemy lives at the lowest point on the block. The first rain came 2 weeks later. A soft, steady drizzle. Cheryl's roses began to drown. Todd's fire pit became a koi pond, minus the koi. They called the city. The city sent an inspector. The inspector saw my permits, smiled, and said, "Nothing out of code here." I offered Cheryl some sandbags. She did not laugh. And while her lawn became a swamp, my land, restructured, filtered, and reseeded, began to bloom again. The HOA tried to retaliate, but they were slipping, literally and figuratively. Neighbors began to speak up. One woman on the East End sent me cookies with a note. "Thank you for standing up to them. I've hated them since they made me repaint my mailbox 3 times. And Cheryl? She filed an emergency motion to classify my yard as a disruptive hydrological system. The judge tossed it out in 5 minutes. Because here's what she didn't get. She may have drained my lake, but all she really did was expose the mud she was standing on, and I hadn't even started the real payback yet. Next, I brought their whole house of cards crashing down. The thing about water, it remembers. And so do people, especially the quiet ones who've been watching everything from the sidelines. While Cheryl was busy drying out her flower beds with pool vacuums and filing useless complaints, I was building a coalition of the fed up. Greg and I started meeting with neighbors. Privately, people who were sick of the HOA's petty tyranny. People fined for garden gnomes visible from the street, or for parking slightly crooked, or for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailbox. Turns out I wasn't the only one they'd been targeting, just the most visible. We started calling ourselves the Backyard Council. It was a joke at first, but soon It became something more. Greg unearthed HOA election rules buried in the original community charter. Turns out, annual elections were supposed to be open to all residents, HOA member or not, if their property was affected by board decisions. Cheryl had been skipping that fine print for years. So we filed an injunction, quietly, legally. In the meantime, I hosted a community BBQ on my recovering property. Just burgers, lemonade, and a whole lot of hay. Did you know Cheryl increased her own landscaping budget last quarter? People showed up. They listened. And they started to turn. The following week, we printed flyers. Nothing hostile, just quotes from real HOA documents. HOA funds may be redirected without full member. Vote in the case of environmental discretion. Board may override homeowner complaints deemed unreasonable. Water features not pre-approved subject to removal. I posted them around the neighborhood, on community boards, even tucked a few in mailboxes. No commentary, just their own words, in bold. The HOA tried to remove them, but by then too many people had seen them. Then came the vote. Greg nominated me for a board seat. Cheryl tried to block it, said I didn't represent community values, but the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Not after the photos, the quotes, the 10K fine horror stories. The meeting was supposed to be routine. It turned into a mutiny. One by one, neighbors stood up, told their stories, called out the hypocrisy, cited the bylaws. Cheryl's tight-lipped composure began to crack. Todd whispered something to her, but she just sat there, staring straight ahead like a porcelain doll left out in the rain. And then we won. 3 board members ousted. Myself, Greg, and a soft-spoken retired teacher named Linda took their seats. First order of business, reverse the unjust fines, cancel fraudulent violations, start the process to restore the lake. Second order, audit the HOA's discretionary spending. You should have seen Cheryl's face when she realized her $6,800 sustainable rosebed enhancement might be repaid from her own pocket. But I wasn't done. With legal advice, we opened a public complaint with the city for HOA mismanagement of common resources. Turns out, when you drain a lake without environmental review, it violates 2 local ordinances. Oops. An official notice went up on the HOA board. Pending environmental violation. Review. All non-essential board activities frozen. Cheryl resigned the next day. She didn't even say goodbye, just packed her pearls and stormed off like a dictator whose statues had just been pulled down. And as poetic justice would have it, that very weekend, we got our first real rainfall since I'd installed the swale system. But this time, it drained perfectly into the newly cleared lake bed. Neighbors came out and watched as water pooled back where it belonged. Ducks returned. Frogs croaked. Kids skipped rocks. My lake came back to life. And Cheryl's house? Still sitting 3 feet above the water table. But now, no HOA budget to save her. No sympathy from the neighbors she ruled over. Just mud where her power used to be. And me, standing on my dock, watching it all return. The real climax didn't come with shouting or lawsuits. It came quietly with a knock. A city official from environmental oversight arrived one morning in a beige SUV, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. Cheryl, still, technically listed as HOA president, during the violation period, had to meet them at the newly formed community wetland, also known as her backyard. She was forced to walk through ankle-deep mud in heels, trying to explain how a natural water feature had developed without permits, studies, or proper drainage. I watched from my porch sipping coffee as frogs chirped in the background. It was the kind of poetic silence you don't interrupt. The official took photos. Lots of them. He asked for records of the lake drainage, approvals, and engineering specs. Cheryl had none, because she never filed them. Within a week, the city issued a formal citation to the HOA, environmental mismanagement, unauthorized alteration of natural wetlands, and failure to consult public resources before action. Fines, $25,000, payable by the HOA General Fund, which meant, ironically, Cheryl herself was now responsible for a cut of the damage she caused. Oh, and the kicker? Because the HOA had spent years denying me board rights. My portion of the fine was exempt. The city also ordered the HOA to restore the lake to its original natural state, using licensed contractors and at full expense to the board. I didn't say a word during the public meeting. I just handed them the original survey photos and smiled. But the most satisfying moment? When Cheryl sold her home. Unstable yard due to groundwater issues, the listing read. She tried to frame it as natural water features with unique character. Didn't help. The sale price dropped. $80,000. Before she left, I saw her one last time loading a suitcase into her trunk. Our eyes met. She looked exhausted, bitter, but mostly small, not because she lost, but because she finally saw what real power looked like. Not aggression, not rules twisted to control others, but calm, strategic accountability. I didn't have to destroy her. I just had to let the truth do what water always does, find its level. The neighborhood has changed since then. The new HOA is transparent. Votes are public. Fines require real evidence. And the lake? It's now classified as a community-shared natural zone, with my property as the designated steward, which means no one's draining it again. And Todd? He now serves on the gardening committee, under supervision. Some people need structure. Some just need a little mud between the toes. It's funny how quiet the neighborhood feels now. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear, but the kind that follows a long, overdue storm, birdsong, water lapping at the dock, kids laughing where fines used to echo, peace earned. The lake is full again, not just with water, but with life. Ducks glide through the reeds. The turtles came back. Even the raccoons stopped stealing. My birdseed and started behaving like proper wildlife. Well, mostly. I rebuilt the dock. This time I added a bench. Sometimes I sit there at sunset, just watching the ripple of water and thinking about how close I came to letting them win. All they had to do was push a little harder, and I might have sold, given up. But here's the thing. You don't win against bullies by yelling louder. You win by outlasting them, by knowing the rules better than they do, by letting their lies rot in the sunlight, by building so carefully that when they try to knock it down, they collapse instead. So if you've ever felt powerless, trapped by some petty authority, some paper tyrant trying to run your life with fine print and threats, just remember, there's more than one way to drain a swamp. Sometimes you let the water rise. Let them drown in their own tactics. Your turn. Have you ever dealt with an out-of-control HOA? A neighbor from hell or a battle for your property rights? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you made it this far, comment "Justice served," so I know you're one of the real ones. Oh, and hit that like button like it's a $300 fine notice on your mailbox. Until next time, stay calm, stay smart, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed drain.